Gas stations. Not much stuff to do. You're out of there within minutes because who would ever want to stay longer? It's a place that everyone needs though. They're far more important than people give credit actually. More so when you're traveling and a gas station is the only spot to replenish. And with so many people passing through, there's gotta be money there, right? Oh yeah, cause nothing's gonna go wrong there. Just like in the movies. Kim Sang-Jin's attack the gas station is one of them. Difference is, instead of going clean and serious with a premise like that, he goes all out. This is something that caught my attention while I was teaching one of my free talking classes at a private school. It got me so hooked that I ended up watching it for an entire class session. Yeah, my hot one gave me a lot more leeway than most. We follow 4 guys, No Mark, Mad Dog, Rockstar, and Pain, all nicknamed of course, as they not only attack the gas station but attack Korea's social order. It's an easy plot that takes a robbery and escalates it in absurdist Korean fashion. It's a comedy at heart, filled with slapstick, a couple music cues, and antics that you wouldn't expect from adult criminals. There's something slightly deeper about this film, delivering both physical destruction and the dismissal of the Asian social system. I'll need to give some context as to what gives these events weight. The senseless violence and acts of vandalism here need to be viewed with background info in mind to shed a certain light. It may not make you like these thugs anyway since they're still committing a big crime, but you'll know why they were desperate to do it. Part of the reason why was because they had nothing better to do, but that's not the whole story. Korea's rise to the economic powerhouse of today took many decades since the end of the Korean War. Throughout the 50s and early 60s, South Korea was incredibly vulnerable and susceptible to collapse. Recovering from war and relying heavily on foreign aid for stability, the country was in a precarious situation and needed to reassert itself as a self-reliant, able nation. Enter Park Chung-hee, an army veteran and government official who took power in a coup, establishing himself as president. Park ushered in vast economic initiatives and labor reforms with increasingly authoritarian supremacy to take the agrarian-dependent South Korea and convert it into a mechanized, industrialized society. This rapid growth and change can be seen as something of a miracle for a nation wrought by inefficient dictatorships, lack of resources, and a tenuous relationship with its communist northern half. For all of Park's own autocratic and anti-democratic tendencies, his reign transformed Korea for the better. Since his assassination in 1979, a couple more dictatorial types followed before Korea's democratization became realized in the late 80s and early 90s. It took generations of sacrifice and hardship to make it into the elite of developed nations. As government control lessened in the 80s, private enterprises and capital swayed heavily. More power flowed into businesses and family-based conglomerates, or chaebol. The economy was geared toward manufacturing and exporting, which in practice meant machinery, ships, electronics, cars, and more. It proved to be a solid policy, and through stable foreign currencies and faith in investments domestic and abroad, it would continue to show effective growth. The decades during and after Park's rule had the small peninsular nation overtaking many countries economically, technologically, militarily, and industrially. However, South Korea also had a lot of foreign debt built up for their investments. All it would take is for one of the other East Asian economies to falter to create a chain reaction of currency devaluing, bringing Korea down with it. That very thing happened in 1997 after years of accumulated deficits, quick profit investing, short-sighted policies, and other unsustainable internal and external factors for the affected countries. To give a short summation, whole countries became bankrupt or suffered political and economic blowback during this financial crisis. South Korea was one of the hardest hit, leading to a huge devaluing of its currency, the won. Multiple major corporations fell, hundreds of financial enterprises shut down, and the bulk of the population suffered. It took the IMF, reforms, and some more sacrifice by the people to bring Korea back to normal in 2001. During this rough period, wages were cut or frozen in many companies, unemployment grew while savings were worth far less than before. Social safety nets needed to be implemented to provide for the poor and unemployed. After the success story that had been built up to that point, the situation wasn't something the general public expected. For a country that prided itself on dedication, perseverance, and work ethic, it was more than just a failure, it was an embarrassment. Now that all that's out of the way, it's in this context that you should watch Attack the Gas Station, a rejection of further sacrifice placed upon the Korean people for the good of the nation. I know for me, the late 90s weren't bad at all, but in Korea it wasn't so good. For these thugs, it definitely wasn't good. What brings the most out of this film is understanding this background, why they do what they do, why they act the way they do, what references they make based on their past knowledge, and how they treat others. There are more informative examples about this subject, but to me the down and dirty street level style proved to be more culturally nuanced and entertaining than the procedural and bureaucratic approach. This leads us back to our villains, or should I say anti-heroes. I should reiterate at this point that I've lived in Korea, specifically Ansan. See that mark there between Incheon and Seoul? That's Ansan. Having lived in Korea for a year, I think I can say with an informed opinion that these guys aren't gangbae. They aren't even proper Jopo. I've dealt with Jopo and these guys are definitely below them. They all dress like they came out of a clothing catalog that doesn't have a target demographic. Their planning skills also leave a lot to be desired. Their intellect is on par with your average live PD criminals, which is to say, extremely lacking in critical thinking. The smartest of the group and de facto leader, No-Mark, plots to not just rob a gas station once, but do so again within a very short period of time. The idea he gets is that no one would expect the same place to get attacked twice so soon. Thing is, the owner took precautions anyway. Now with the station under control and the staff held hostage, the crooks have the only idea that makes any sense to them. Fill up gas for customers until they can get enough money to make it worth their efforts. And that's the entire movie. One night, one gas station under siege, and both sides of killing time and getting paid while increasing tensions between the employees, the four leads, and the characters that pass through. All sorts of people come and go. Some are captured depending on the whims of the gang as they improvise one thing after another. No-Mark tries to keep things in check. Paint and Rockstar both enforce and fool around, while anyone that ends up as a hostage contends with the strict disciplinarian that is Mad Dog. I keep saying Mad Dog, but he's primarily known as Bulldozer, I believe. Call it a mistranslation issue that I'll fix from here on. Bulldozer in particular is the easiest to annoy, fitting well with the actor Oh-seong, who I know as one of my favorite villains in a Korean drama, Gi-Tae from Faith. I've yet to see a K-drama villain top his elitist pimp persona. While the four are aggressive and intimidating in their own right, you come to find out though that they all have a reason for being here. Yeah, they all to certain extents enjoy doing this, but they'd rather be doing something else based on what lives they had before. Their backstories are only told through brief flashbacks, which are adequate enough to convey who these guys are. They aren't inherently evil people who get off on power trips and destruction. Paint is an unconventional artist who is harshly shunned by his family for wanting to choose a different life's path. Rockstar was seen as a loser musician that didn't take a typical career seriously and was indebted to the wrong people. Mad Dog's dominating persona stems from his hatred of harsh schooling, wanting to take back his control against other figures of authority. No-Mark's orphan upbringing and disdain for abuse of power were incompatible with the rigors of competition within the Korean system. Each of these guys are fleshed out just enough to where you know that it's not just that they became criminals, but that if things were even a little different in their lives, they wouldn't be here. In a society that puts appearance, social standing, and saving face as priorities, these are four outcasts that couldn't care less anymore. The flip side is that everyone they encounter seem to do all the above in their own ways. They follow Asian ethics, behavior, and social cues to almost comical levels. Employees at first submit to their boss unquestionably. The boss schemes and gives up on his employees to preserve his own money and life. Customers are rude and look down upon the workers, and even the police use their position to assert unjust authority. The gang robs the gas station because it lets them subvert the system they despise, a system that shunned their own aspirations. These thugs go from just being bad guys to anti-heroes, seeking some sort of place in a society they feel they don't belong in. That, or they find their own way of being successful in said society. Far from being the only criminals in Seoul, the four come across larger street gangs and organized Jopo. Or gangbae, I think these guys might go deep. Yet when the other gangs press their influence, a unique type of righteousness takes form. Before they know it, Seoul's criminal underbelly wants them dead. Attack the Gas Station does have issues. By American standards, these gangsters look and act very corny compared to what we're used to seeing depicted. It's also a film that feels of the time, in the spotlight before the influx of gang comedies that would be featured prominently in the decade that followed. The sound effects, pacing, and sometimes off-the-mark comedy bits will take you out of it a little. Also, how in a city of millions does this block not seem to have anyone in sight most of the time? Where I was in Ansan, yeah, the streets were pretty dead at night in certain areas, but that city has a fraction of the population. I'm sure budget was the biggest limiter, and it definitely shows. Lack of budget still didn't stop this from getting its point across well. I've seen far more expensive films that try going after something and it ends up being boring. Better that than something so dull and predictable that it may as well have come off a Samsung assembly line. If you go down the K rabbit hole, you'll end up finding stuff that'll change your life. So much melodrama thrown at you and it becomes binding. I've seen much of it myself, and even after all these years of absorbing K culture, this movie still manages to stand out. It's not top of the heap in terms of being a favorite of mine. I think I'd give that to something a lot more near and dear. But I'd recommend it to those wanting raw Korean cinema. It isn't wasting the opportunity to entertain and provide some meaning behind the madness.